You have to understand where all customers are not created equal, and segmenting them by their size doesn't always mean that they're in a similar level of maturity around the business processes that your technology or service is helping them with. So it's understanding which first value moment to do, and then actually truly understanding the customer and will they actually see that as a first value moment.
This is the Launch Station, the only place you need to look for all things customer onboarding, implementation, and customer success. Tune in for insights from industry experts every week.
Hey everyone, welcome to yet another episode of the Launch Station. Today we have with us Lindsey Lane. She's currently VP of Customer Experience at Isometric Technologies, and the last 8+ years she's been spending in the domain of success, partner success, customer success, etc. Lindsey, I'll let you do a little more justice if you want to add anything else to your background.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for having me. I would say the last even 10+ years, it's been all around delighting customers, regardless of what the role is, from big consulting firms doing large waterfall SAP implementations to now more in the early stage technology startup space where it's just a little bit different. We're a different size. So as you mentioned, I'm the VP of Customer Experience. So that's everything post-sale within our company, including implementation, customer success, and customer support. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And we chatted before to figure out what topic we want to choose. And
yeah,
what we came up with was planning and achieving first value for customers, which I think everyone cares about a lot. And how can we do it for companies, for customers at varying maturity levels? So that's going to be the topic for today, folks. But before we jump into the main topic, a little bit of an icebreaker. Lindsey, can you tell us, if you could travel anywhere, where would you go?
I think that the icebreaker question is going to be harder for me than the actual the actual topic that we're going to be chatting about today, because I love travel. I love traveling everywhere. If I could pick somewhere, maybe that I have not been, I've been fortunate to get to travel through work quite a bit and personal as well. Australia and New Zealand has been on my list for a very long time. So I feel like if I say that as my answer, it's more manifesting that it will happen sooner than later, that I'll get to go to those locations. I scuba dive, I like adventure, and I have a handful of friends actually down in that area, and would love to go. So
that sounds great.
That's today's response. I really want to just go everywhere, but that's more me manifesting the whatever our next trip is.
Awesome. Now, yeah, we'll move to the topic. I just wanted to start with understanding a little more, on maybe what you do at Isometric Technologies or at previous firms. Have you seen specific kind of challenges arise when customers are of varying maturity levels and you're trying to onboard them?
It's a constant at probably every company that I've worked at, but for different reasons and ways, because the maturity of your company, and then the maturity of your customers are two things that are a bit fluid, especially if you're working in the enterprise space. So I'll speak a bit more from the lens of the earlier stage technology company, because that has been my experience. I'm currently in my 4th early stage company. I've seen all different varieties of outcomes throughout that. That's when the company is on the earlier side of the maturity scale. So typically when it's an earlier company, you're trying to help your customers transform to do something differently. regardless of your industry. I know it's an overly simplistic way to think about it, but it's the same thing that larger companies are doing too. But I can speak more authentically to my most current experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you're earlier on from a company perspective, you're also usually in the make it work kind of stage of a company, or transitioning from like making it work to making it scale. So from switching it to making it work to making it scale, you really have to understand your customers, and you might not have them segmented. You might think about your customers in different ways. So the theme of it really is you kind of have to meet your customers where you're at. Regardless if you're a big company, medium company, like enterprise, SMB, mid-market, now with the variety of options that you have for technology, especially with technologies, but also services, you have to understand where all customers are not created equal, and segmenting them by their size doesn't always mean that they're in a similar level of maturity around the business processes that your technology or service is helping them with, right? I think it's sometimes challenging in an earlier stage company because you're still kind of figuring it out. Like I mentioned, like you're switching from like make it work to make it scale, and you're still learning all of the different ways that a customer might find value from your product or service.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also more willing to work with a wider variety of customers, right? You're still like learning what that ICP is, but that's where the customer maturity and having some methodology, it's different for every company, of how you think about the maturity of your customers for different business processes. Then you can start to evaluate, because as we know, post-sale customer experience, achieving first value, achieving value is challenging. It's not always straightforward. And understanding the barrier, say that you have a technology that requires the company to really understand a certain type of methodology, like agile example.
Right.
You work with 3 different companies. There's 3 different companies that want to use your solution, that say that your solution is like a Jira-esque type solution, right? Ticketing, but also, using for an agile process, for different parts of working from an agile perspective. Your product is dependent on the customer's fundamental maturity in that business process and methodology. So if you have 3 customers and one customer is in the process of defining what is agile at company A, company C is everybody's certified and safe. They are just the ultimate. they're the example of how agile is supposed to function within an organization. It's adopted widely, etc. And then company B is somewhere in the middle. How you as the technology company serve each of those 3 customers is going to be fundamentally different, because they're in different parts of transformation of their business, of the business process and methodology that your technology supports. So you can't meet them. You have to meet each of them in different places. The company C that like is all safe certified, et cetera, Scrum Masters and every team, like all this, you could potentially even just give them your solution. Their onboarding might be different. You might be able to just say, hey, like, here's all our materials, put it on your internal wiki. We'll do a train the trainer with you, but like, you know what you're doing. And like, here's some fun bells and whistle features that like, once you're ramped, you're really going to be able to get this extra value of some of our special features. I would kind of go in with that mentality with them. But for company A, that they're just defining what agile is at their company, like they've never done it before, I'm probably going to do a little bit more hand holding. I might show them more basic features because they're not ready yet for like the full scale of what we do. So like then you can bring in product segmentation, you can bring in all different types of things. But hopefully that's like a theory description, but then like a tangible explanation with an exam, like an exam. Because thinking about first value and maturity model, it's like very like here. So like not think if you don't have like a good example, like I think it's sometimes hard to think about.
Absolutely. And I think, Agile is simple enough that most of us are familiar with it, especially
Yes.
people working with projects. So that was a great example that you took
In
over there.
some way, shape, or form, you know what the word is, which like reflects the maturity model of even individuals, you know?
Right, right. I'm curious when it comes to assessing where the customer is, right? Have you seen people use some sort of framework for it? Are there specific dimensions that you should always think about? Like, hey, what's the data maturity or ecosystem of other products you need to talk to? Or, you mentioned business process and functional maturity. Is there like a formula to figuring out, hey, here are the pieces that we need to think about, and here is how you collect that information from a salesperson or
Yeah.
pre-sales. How do you
This
go
is
about it?
it's such an interesting thing because I've at least found success, but I think it can happen any which way, where you look at your existing customer base and ideally you're doing, value-based selling. You're understanding what are the jobs to be done that your product's being used for, and then using that to assess value. Um, from a maturity matrix perspective, and this is why it's different. And like creating some sort of framework, it's not necessarily like a one size fits all for every company, because the value of your company, maybe for competing companies, it'll probably be pretty similar. But it's also about how you define and track some companies that is size of company. You and like from a very pure number perspective, if you are not an enterprise, you are not going to get value from what we do. One would argue that it kind of just lends more into like the ICP world or not. Um, business process is generally a very good category. We're talking categories maybe, and then like what works inside your company would be how you define and like kind of go down to the next level within that category. So business process maturity as it relates to the business processes that your product or service supports. That's one. Call it business product processes or methodologies. The next category too is especially if you're in technology, like the rest of the tech stack. One that will reflect if you're able to actually work in their environment. You know what I mean? Because a lot of companies are doing reconciliation and reduction. Maybe that category is like the environment, and then like another like a subcategory is also like your staffing as well, of like the expertise that you have on staff, because your product might require a certain level of like BI capability from a technology perspective. Like you must be able to collect this type of data or like make these types of choices. But the staffing capability, you also need to have people that can do it. So you might have the data, but you might not have the people. So I think that those are some like the general categories of, like the business processes, the technical infrastructure, and like capabilities, and then the staffing capabilities. Like, do you have the people, and like, do they also have the skill sets required to get the value out of your product or service? Because essentially what you want to do is, and when you think about those different categories, is if you come up with the categories, the way that you can assess the categories, and again, like post-sale is helpful because you already have customers doing it, right? You know which customers are like, woof, they're using every feature functionality. They get it. They have the right staff. They have the right other technologies, and they have the right business processes that using our technology or service is enhancing what they do. They've already kind of gone through, maybe we help them through a transformation, or they've gone through a transformation that they are truly getting value. And then you kind of put them as like the highest level category. And then you have other customers that they are still great customers, but they're just not as far along in their journey for whichever reason, whichever category. It's helpful when you think of the categories and then like pressure test it with existing customers on that, because it helps you, one, reevaluate if those are the correct categories and almost like weigh them a little bit. But two, when you're explaining it to other people internally, you can say, oh, it's like that company A. Company A is a great example of like level 5 on our maturity. Like it brings the personalization there to it. And then that's when you can start to go into pre-sales, because ideally you can think about this from a pre-sales perspective. Okay, we have all this information. Maybe we have them fill out a form to indicate they can answer questions in a form that help us understand where they sit in each of our categories based on comparison with our baseline that we have within our existing customer base. Okay, interesting. Now you can find out in the pre-sale, all right, where are they going to hit? And then that comes back full circle into like the planning and achieving first value, because first value for people at different companies at different maturity levels will be different based on their maturity level. So if you can identify that in the pre-sales process, you can then adjust your even staffing model or your approach post-sale, but in a scalable way, because then you can say, oh, there's pathways A, B, C, and D, because that maps to maturity level 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, and then you can build pricing plans around it as well. But like taking it, plotting out, coming up with the categories, plotting out existing customers onto that matrix, and then backing it into the pre-sale is it's when you can use almost evidence for it, but it's easier. The most challenging thing about something like this process is getting people's buy-in internally that it makes sense, and it should lead to for us to evolve how we work. You know what I mean? So you need contextual examples for that type of stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. I actually got some ideas flowing in my mind around some of the things we've experienced, and
Yeah.
two separate topics that I'm going to go into based on what you said. One is latching on to what you said about the business process. There is the environment and tech stack you need to operate in, and there's the capabilities. Would you say if capabilities are amiss, let's say people in
Yeah.
a new customer that you're trying to work with, sales is selling them a vision of going from 0 to 5, but you understand that there are some capability issues in the customer team that's not that makes 0 to 1 a question.
Right.
How do you deal with that? Would you recommend to sales that, hey, don't sell this customer, they're not ready yet, they need to get ready in this manner? Advise the customer on that, or are there other ways around this?
Well, the thing that's interesting when you're thinking about that, like 0 to 1, and depending on the phase of your company, based on the phase of your company, you could say ICP, our ideal customer profile, is 3 to 5. We cannot serve people that are 0 and 1. That we will not be successful. They are not ready. And maybe there's some content that you could give them, but that I think goes back to it's also a really good mechanism for qualifying customers and working with sales to qualify and tangibly kind of drawing that line in the sand with either post-sale or pre-sale, the seller and the sales engineer, you know what I mean? Whoever's helping qualify, there's 2 different pathways for that specific customer. One, they're not a qualified customer, and you will never be able to help them get to value. If you can never help them get to value, you're not going to renew them anyway. You're going to spend a bunch of resources. They're going to get frustrated. They're going to maybe in that, if the capability is a huge requirement that can't be compensated for by your team, then that is a strict line in the sand that should be included in the sales qualifying requirements. That's one That's one avenue. And I would expect between like the handshake that happens with pre and post sale, you know what I mean? Hey, we will never make them successful. Like we will not be able to help them. So that's one. The other option is if your company has a level of professional services. Sometimes in that specific scenario, there is someone at that customer passionate enough that wants to learn it. Now, that's a company decision if you're willing to invest the amount of time to help train that person. That's where professional services come in. That's where some, like, especially in like earlier stage companies, where the whole blurred line of what a customer success manager does is more than what you'd see at a more mature company. You know what I mean? You're really helping you're kind of becoming a part of their company. We've all seen it. You know what I mean? That's still a viable option. It is just not something that's scalable. Maybe it's a super important customer. Maybe it's a customer worth getting, even if they don't have the capability. You have to be willing to make that trade-off, and everybody has to know that that's what's coming. But if ideally, there's someone at that customer, it wasn't just like purchased by a leader and just like handed down and no one particularly cares. But if there's someone that's like, I know we don't have the capability, I think it's really important, and I am willing to put my hand up there and I want to learn it, especially if it can be like a really impactful customer in different ways. I'll always go for it. But again, like that's very much so like the early stage company mentality too. Later stage, I would be, they're not qualified.
Yeah, I guess early on you want to get those wins under the belt, and
Yeah.
there's gonna be, you need to prove
So many
to
trade-offs.
investors and so on that you're able to sell. So everything that comes your way, how do we make it work? Whatever it takes could be the mentality, but with the knowledge that, hey, there is a capability gap that needs to be bridged. Here's the effort we're going to put into that. Hopefully the customer acknowledges that too.
Yeah. Identifying it is, and what you're saying is talking about at least identifying and talking about it. That is a small nuance, but it's so important, because there's a lot of situations where like, oh yeah, we know they're not qualified. We know, but we'll compensate for them. We'll make it work. But saying why we're going to need to compensate and like documenting that and maybe having that as like a clear step, like a check mark that's in your Salesforce or in your like project plan. You know what I mean? Like being intentionally noting that, because then you can say, okay, after a first half of the year, let's go back and do a report and see how many customers we were willing to take on that don't have the capability. Is that an issue with our offering?
Yeah, very interesting.
You know what I mean? Then you can start to like use that as a data point versus yeah, it's just what we do,
Right. It takes me back to early days of Rocket Lane, where one of the patterns we saw was, there were some customers who struggled with adoption in their team, and there's some customers who did really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we thought about it, when we analyzed it, it went back to, hey, you know what? There's a strong leader in this company, and they were able to drive adoption really well. In these other companies, seems to be a little bit of like a leadership issue as well, right? And obviously, as a early product, we were also learning tactics of how to drive that adoption, how to help the customers drive adoption. But there was that clear difference coming through. And we've since then started sometimes challenging the customer, right? As part of a sales process, going to them and saying, hey, are you capable of driving adoption for a tool like this?
Yeah.
Do you have that confidence? And sometimes just asking them the question makes them aware of what they need to do, what they need to be as part of that journey. And that's helping.
Well, and what you're also doing too is, and it ties back to like the initial thing. If you want to use a piece of technology, you're asking people to change the way that they work. Even if it's like a tiny little change, that still requires effort. You don't just turn something on and, like it's also like why customer success and customer experience like exist, especially from like a SaaS perspective. But especially if your product is not apples to apples or very similar to something else that they've used, you are going to run into a different hurdle. And then there's going to need to be a constant, persistent verification that this is something that we want to do and we have to see it through, and it doesn't happen overnight. I always use the explanation of like, because I've also been like in Rocket Lane, something like that. You may have used something similar before, but you may have not. You may have used Microsoft Project. You know what I mean? You may have used a piece of paper. I don't know, and a lot of all of the technologies that I've worked for, it required a switch of how people work. And a lot of the time from like analog to digital. So like using a piece of paper or whiteboard to using a digital whiteboard, where you're fundamentally changing even the medium of how you're doing something. It's not like, growing up, I used AOL Instant Messenger, and then I used Link or Communicator or Skype, and then now there's Microsoft Teams and Slack. You also text every day. There's a fundamental iMessage for X amount of time. It's a skill set that everybody's used to doing. You know what I mean? Regardless of what product they're using for it. For Rocket Lane, for what we do today, it's that shift of you're going to have to cognitively learn how to do something vastly different. Not little bit different, but like very different. And that's why you have to root in the business process. Not, I used to click this button in SAP and now I'm using Oracle. So hopefully that came through right. But I think it's such an interesting thing to think about, because it does then lead to the things that you're talking about. Like, we really needed leadership buy-in for this. And it's not just to say, hey, do you realize how much time this is going to take and like effort? But you need to continue to remind them, like, we could be working in a different way, but that requires change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's hard. It's because you have to convince people. You know what I mean? Not everybody's going to be on board, and that says nothing about how great your solution is. You know what I mean? It's more about the individual or the team. So
right. So given the kind of working in a bunch of different companies, I'm sure you've seen a variety of kinds of challenges in getting customers to value. What strategies have you seen work out well in ensuring customers reach that first value, and that you've planned the right amount of first value depending on that maturity, as you said?
Understanding, and I know this is like the theme of what we're talking about. One, understanding where they're at in the maturity. And so you can kind of pick from a laundry list of what might they see as a first value moment, and how can we focus on that one thing. That's one. First value is interesting because that's really assessing, is this first value moment something that actually will find as value? Because you could think that you got to something that's first value, but they don't really care. They care about, maybe there's like a 3-part implementation and you're like, okay, great. We broke it into 3 chunks so that like deployment number 1 is first value. But they could say, we actually like don't care about that. We just want to be fully live. So it's understanding which first value moment to do, and then actually truly understanding the customer, and will they actually see that as a first value moment. Being open. A third one is being open to they might find value in different activities that you do, that you might not realize that is a value moment for them, that you could actually use that as a first value, and then use that as a feedback loop for your other customers of, oh, So there was an activity that we do that help like rationalize a certain normally with our customers right now, they've got reasons codes in their system. What we've every single customer that we've worked with, they're in flight in like a program or a project to reduce the number of reason codes they have in their system. We need a list of reason codes as part of our implementation process. What's been interesting is for every single one, we do like a little workshop with them and we help them whittle the reason code down. For one of our customers, when we met with them, they said, we've been wanting to do this for like 6 months and you really helped us get through doing this. This is highly valuable for us as a business. I was like, huh, this is
Before the product is implemented.
required to do this to make our stuff work. You know what I mean? But this was just a service that you have already found value from working with us. It doesn't, you know what I mean? So keeping an eye on being willing and flexible and like listening and understanding your customer, that is a value moment. That could be the first value. It just might not be as defined as this is our ROI metric. Like if we didn't hit this for them yet, they have not gotten value from us, especially in the world where I've worked at companies that you turn the product on. There's no implementation. I can use it today. Great. I've worked at other companies where it's a 6 to 9 month implementation process. And then you have to be live, and then it still takes a month of using it to then see value. First value in those two different style products is so vastly different, because for first value for the first version, I mean, I could sign up for Rocket Lane and not set up the integrations, this, that, and the other. I can create my first template, use it with a customer, and get value tomorrow. Or I could use a product that's like a product that requires data to flow in from my systems, and then I do a workflow in that product. You will not get value until it's live, but you can if you're willing to kind of like try to figure out how can I help this customer in the meantime.
Right.
So hopefully that sort of answers the question that you're asking.
Yeah, my takeaway is, continue some level of discovery and conversation all the time, right? And
Right.
listen to those signals of where else value is being recognized by the customer, what they are acknowledging as value throughout, right? So maybe there are questions to pepper with every activity you do, or before each activity. Hey, what do you expect out of this? What would be value for you? And then look at documenting those moments so that verify with newer customers as well. Hey, do you also see this as value? Someone else found this workshop valuable. Would it be valuable for you? Then you start discovering more.
We're trying to understand, because it is a prerequisite for you to get value from our product. For a lot of technologies, switching to using that technology is an opportunity to look at how you're working and adjust it. And even to that question we were talking about before of like, if someone's like a 0 or a 1 on your like maturity like matrix or evaluation, do we work with them or like whatnot? Those customers are very interesting first value, especially if you have professional services teaching. So going back to like that agile one, maybe your company is a little bit more mature and you have a whole professional services component of your customer experience team that is education on agile, getting started within your company with agile. You could have a first value moment with just that professional services group before they even think about implementing your technology. And that even might be more valuable for the company because they probably have some sort of high level company goal. And this is where you can also figure out when, like, how and when first value will kind of click in, like understanding the company, the team, and then the individual like goals of the people that you're working with. That they probably have a goal, establish a baseline of agile and have X% of the company as like certified agile practitioners. So it's a stepping stone for them being like a better qualified customer or like having a better foundation to be able to use your product, but you just help them hit that. And that can sometimes mean more, especially at the leadership level. And so like you might be like, oh man, like we're we're delayed. We signed them this day and they're not going to start using the product until like a month later than customers usually like they should be. But you spent that month helping them hit a goal that you can also use that time as like, yeah, I'm teaching you something, but like you can kind of also pepper in the value of your company as you're going through. So you're actually creating a solid foundation for them for their goal, but also for you for bumping them up that maturity matrix. So
Makes a lot of sense. And, I think it becomes very valuable for them that you're showing them the path to what it's going to take them to succeed, coaching them along the way, and empowering them with the right systems to make that happen.
Completely.
So,
and how many times do you get a question from a customer? And like that's also like the beauty of like having some sort of maturity matrix or evaluation criteria. It doesn't have to put companies in a box. You know what I mean? But how many times customer asks, what does great look like? What's the best practice? You know what I mean? What are your companies doing that are using every feature and functionality? Regardless of how established companies are, like I've even seen in like the biggest companies and the smallest companies, people waffle a little bit in like how to answer that. If you have that structure and then also examples of existing customers of where they hit, you can make that anonymous and say, that's a great question. We would consider you, and this then becomes a thought leadership piece. We would consider you from like a Rocket Lab perspective, from like a SaaS CS like project management perspective, like a 2 out of 5. And here's why. You know what I mean? Don't think about it as a number. You know what I mean? It's just these are the things that you're doing in our different categories. And this is how we've evaluated you based on what we know about you. Maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. This is what a 5 is. But guess what? We have programs that can help you get from a 2 to 3, a 3 to 4, and a 4 to 5. And salespeople love this. And on top of that, we have a couple customer references that are at those different levels that we could also start to create a community that you could talk to them, ask them what they're doing. Because then you can either create the community effect or in the pre-sales world, you can use them as references. So then it also starts to like tie together, but then you're not using like a level 5 reference with like someone that is level 1, unless that is tactical, to like show them like the art of the possible, even though they're not anywhere near there. So there's so many ways, different ways to like leverage it in different ways.
Yeah, as long as sales isn't selling the person at 1 that, hey, 2 months we'll have you at level 5.
You could be a 5 in 2 months. You know what I mean? No. Yeah. Oh yeah. There's boundaries.
Yeah. Awesome. This is great. I think, one other related topic or to jump into is, and you mentioned this as well, getting the customers to also acknowledge that value. What strategies, tactics have you seen work for implementation teams to get the customer to open up and talk about what value they're already seeing without fear of, hey, I don't want this team to be complacent about, hey, they're already delivering value. We need so many more things to happen in the next phase. How do you get them to, open up, give you the right feedback, and acknowledge the value they're already getting?
So there's a couple different things. Predictability and consistency usually tend to lead people to respond to questions that you ask, prompted and unprompted. If you mention at the beginning of working together, when you kick off working with a guest, hey, we're going to ask you questions as we go along the way. You know, and explain to them what you're doing. Like, we want to make sure throughout this process that you are finding value and that you're also being heard within our company. So at certain milestones and certain moments where we think that you're going to get something or learn something or have that, we're going to ask you some questions, just like as a heads up, you know what I mean? And but that also, you get something, we get something. That means you get full access to us to give us feedback about how we're working with you or about our product and service. Usually if you bring it up front and then it's at a regular cadence, it's not every week, it's not every month, maybe it's a quarterly thing. You know what I mean? And I'm not going to say quarterly business reviews because I do not love those, but just thinking about like the specific level of cadence, they then know it's coming, but you can't then just do it once. You also have to be consistent and predictable. Okay, perfect. We're going to ask you this again. And maybe, and again, it could go with milestone. It should go with milestones or like you're saying, like these different value moments, but then they know, hey, we're coming up on this certain phase. We think that you got value from this. Did you? What type of value? Okay, great. And then that can go two different directions. If they didn't get value and you think that they did, at least you know now. You're being curious, and if they didn't, okay, perfect. We would love to we need to have a feedback session because that means that how we are thinking that you're using or getting value from the system is not aligned with the reality of it. We want you to feel heard. Go feedback. You know what I mean? The other direction, oh yeah, we are getting value. Okay, great. It can end there. It could turn into a feedback session, like with the positive or negative, or that can turn into, would you be willing to talk about it? You know what I mean? Or like, and that doesn't have to be a big blog post or a case study or this. Could you give me a sentence? Like, can I, like, even if it's anonymous, then you can start to do different things with it. But I think that the most important thing, people don't respond when all of a sudden out of nowhere you're like, was this valuable to you? And they're like, sure. Yeah, I don't know, or just feedback. Like then it feels like a homework assignment, or it can be abrupt. But if you let them know in advance, like build it into your project, build it into your project plan, build it into the way in which you work, and say it at the beginning and say it early and often. Because some people will say it, you know what I mean? Oh, like we really believe in feedback and blah, 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 blah. But then they say it and then it's never done.
Right.
So it's just being consistent and following through on that. That's what I've seen. That's what I've seen successful. Because at the end of the day, every customer might be like, hey, we're going to take this and run with it. We don't want to talk to you. We're good. Yes, I found this valuable. And that's okay too. You know what I mean? On to the next one.
Right.
It's a numbers game.
Absolutely. Great inputs, Lindsey. I think, we're coming towards the end of the episode. Quick couple of questions to, end the show. One, do you have a book or a movie that inspired you, which you want to recommend to people watching the show?
That's a hard one for me. I love reading. I use reading as an escape from work, and similar with movies. I would say and I can't think of the titles of all the books right now. Any book around tiny habits, atomic habits. If I'm from these words, you're probably thinking of 4 different books right now. I love those, and they give me inspiration when it comes to my work life, because change doesn't happen by big sweeping moments and big sweeping changes. It can, but those little tiny habits that build over time is incredible. And I've used that personally and professionally.
Awesome. Last question for the day. Any advice you have to share for fellow leaders?
Well, there's the one thing behind me. Work hard and be nice to people. That's something that I do live by. It really lends to just a generally positive experience. Work is what you do a lot of your time and a lot of your day. And that is something that I really believe in. And also fail fast. I know that's both of those are a little bit generic, but that's the way I run my teams. That's the way that I try to lead. And it leads, typically anything can really be a positive outcome if you're willing to learn from it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lindsey, and sharing all great tidbits.
No, absolutely. Thank you for having me.